Hey guys, Jason here. Welcome back to another video here on the second channel, and another episode of JoJo. Yep. So yeah, I just finished watching part 2 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So without further ado, let's actually get started. So, first things first, I wanted to say that part 2 is definitely better than part 1, without a doubt. Definitely. Got some pretty dope fights, some pretty dope characters. It's just pretty good overall. What you call it? Next thing I wanted to say is, remember how in part 1's episode I was going to tell you I was going to watch part 2 and I was going to tell you which protagonist I thought was better, Jonathan Joestar or Joseph Joestar? And yeah, so here are my thoughts on that. At first, I thought like Joseph was pretty smart and all, and I thought like he got straight to the point. But there was a fight in episode 4. I don't remember what the fight was, but anyway, this is where I was like, I kind of like Jonathan a little better. And this is like, oh well. I don't know. I just felt like Joseph was like not as good just because it was like, oh well, he's needing to be coached a little bit on how to use his Hamon and all this stuff during the fight, and oh yeah, and then that was the same episode we got to meet Stroheim, which we'll talk more about later. But yeah, so I was like, oh well, I wasn't gonna make any final assumptions, but I was like, oh well, like for now I kind of like Jonathan a little better. And then I believe, I don't remember, it was a couple episodes later, when we finally get to meet the Pillarmen, which we'll talk about, AC/DC, Wamu, and Cars, we get a little, what I like to call the prequel fight with Wamu. And then this is where I kind of like, this is where I was like, oh, I like Joseph a little bit better. Because up to that point, he wasn't still trained with Hamon. But I was like, you know what? I'm starting to like this character a little better because he pulled this really smart move. He was like, he tricked Wamu. He's like, let me train my Hamon for a month. And Wamu didn't think, or not Wamu, but Joseph didn't think it was actually going to work. He was just like bluffing, but Wamu seriously took him up on the offer, and they were like, in a month we'll have a fight. And they gave JoJo these rings that would dissolve in approximately a month. So up to that point, he wasn't trained, but then he meets his Hamon coach. Oh, and there's a whole story about his Hamon coach. So he meets his Hamon coach named Lisa, and he pretty much goes through Hamon boot camp for about a month, or about 3 weeks or a month. They train JoJo and his this other character named Caesar. Um, Caesar's a little better skilled in Hamon than JoJo is at up to that point, but eventually Joseph learns, and at that point, that's when I started to like Joseph's character style a lot. Now, you know what I always loved about Joseph is how like during his battles he could predict stuff that people were gonna say. So he was always like, "And next you're gonna say," and then whatever they were gonna say, and yeah, I mean he wouldn't even like stop them either. You just let him say it too, um, and yeah. So um, around this time, JoJo's training and uh, his Hamon and all that stuff. Um, and then I'm not gonna spoil everything that happens, or I'm not gonna spoil every little detail because and I don't even remember every little detail, but I'm not gonna spoil it all just because you should. If you haven't already watched it, you should go and watch it, part one and part two. Um, and yeah, so yeah, um, and then we get the Pillarmen and they're doing what they're doing. Um, oh yeah, and the Pillarmen theme song, Pillarmen song, dude, one of the best songs in the show so far. Um, and yeah, so um, and then um, what is it? Trying to think. Oh yeah, next we get to um, the time that it is to fight with oh yeah, because was it ACDC? Um, they they have a couple battles with him, JoJo and his coach, and then um, ACDC gets killed. Um, and then what is it? JoJo or not JoJo? Um, Caesar, he has a fight with Cars, which we'll talk about more, especially at the end of part two. Yeah, I think it's Cars, and Caesar gets killed from that. No, I'm sorry, it's not Cars. It's Wamu. Yeah, it's Wamu because um, yeah, it's Wamu because was it Cars was trying to find the redstone, and then yeah, Wamu. Um, oh yeah, because it was Wamu. Because yeah, he attacked him with his divine sandstorm. So yeah, oh yeah, and that's one of Wamu's kind of powers is he has this power of what's called a divine sandstorm, and yeah, um, ACDC has the power of boiling blood, and then Cars, yeah, we'll talk about him. And the redstone and the mask. So, um, what is it? So, oh yeah. So let's talk about the redstone. I guess we'll talk about a little bit of that now. So, yeah, the redstone. Um, it was kind of always a thing. That that people that JoJo and the villains have been trying to fight over now for two parts now. I don't think I talked about it much in part one just because yeah, I mean, it was important, but it's not really as important as it is in part two, because no one really was able, or no one really was it used it, I guess, that much, or was it, I don't know, it just wasn't as important. Um, but now we have the redstone to deal with. So it turns out that JoJo's coach, Lisa, and you know what I like about Joseph too is he at first um, he wanted to like kill her, and yeah, he wanted to kill her um, during his Hamon training. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we got to talk about the Hell Climb Pillar. So this was part of their Hamon training, and this, it took them like 3 days for them both to get up to the top. For JoJo and Caesar, um, and the only way that you could get up that tower was by using Hamon. So yeah, but they eventually made that work. You should just you should just go watch that episode if you haven't got to part one or even part two yet. Um, Once you get to that episode's just that episode where they're just going through the Hamon boot camp or Hamon training is, I don't know, it's just fun to watch. Because you see them learn and grow. Um, Especially, like the fights before and then, the fights after. Um, and then, yeah, so, was it? Uh, so, yeah, JoJo, hates, uh, he hates, Lisa, but, um, even after training, he kind of hates her still. But eventually he learns that she has the red stone, and that'll come into real importance later in the part. But uh, he learns that she has the red stone, and so him, Caesar, the other Hamon instructor, because there were two Hamon instructors, but the other one, ACDC, took over, and then they killed him. Oh yeah, that's what it was. JoJo, what was it? JoJo had his final, or he was supposed to have his final Hamon exam. He was supposed to fight, what was his name? Logs? Yeah, he was supposed to fight Logs, and ACDC took over his body, and they ended up killing him. So it was just the one other instructor, Caesar, up to that point, and JoJo, and his coach. So Lisa. So so yeah, they eventually learn that they had the red stone. Then they have the fight. They have a couple fights with cars, and then Wamu shows up. Caesar has that fight. He gets killed by the divine sandstorm, and then oh yeah, and then dude, they were all of them. They were grieving over Caesar. Caesar. And we were like yelling his name. And if you go listen to it in, was it Japanese? If you listen to that part in Japanese, it's even better. So yeah. That happens, and then eventually that other I'm forgetting his name, but the other Hamon instructor gets killed too. And then all that is left is JoJo and Lisa. So it is time for the final battle, because they were supposed to have the fight with or JoJo was supposed to have the fight with Wamu, and then they were still supposed to fight cars. But what happened was, you know, they fought, or they were gonna fight 1-on-1. JoJo was gonna fight Wamu 1-on-1. They all agreed that JoJo was gonna fight Wamu 1-on-1, and then Lisa was supposed to fight Cars 1-on-1. And then and so that happened when at midnight, and they spawn all these creatures. And basically the whole fight was like an arena. It was like when they were fighting, well, more when JoJo was fighting Wamu, because this is when all the stuff starts to go nuts. But when JoJo was fighting Wamu, they basically had, it was like a lap, and if you go around once, then you get a weapon, and then boom, and then it's basically just a fight to the death match. It's basically what it is. And then it was a pretty good fight. Wamu eventually got killed in the end. Wamu thought he had it with his divine sandstorm, but it didn't really work. And then Wamu tried to finish him off, and that still didn't work. And then yeah, and so now it was Cars left to deal with. And so Lisa Cars still didn't want to fight 1-on-1. All he really cared about was attaining the red stone. And so that's exactly what happened. And then throughout this, or during this fight, you remember Stroheim that I talked about, and that showed up in episode 4, and then he showed up one more time, I'm forgetting. Several episodes later, you don't really see them, you don't really see the Germans, was it von Stroheim, and then the other two German guys. You don't really see them show up all that much. They just kind of appear out of nowhere. And that's what kind of happened during these fights. They just kind of appeared out of nowhere. And so they show up, and they're trying to help JoJo and Lisa, and what is it? Right before the fight, or right before even JoJo started fighting Wamu, JoJo found some photos of his Granny Arena, which was Jonathan Joestar's wife. That was Joseph's grandmother. And so you meet that character in part 1, and then you get to meet her more in part 2. And so yeah. So what is it? Lisa was trying to tell JoJo some information before the battle happened, but didn't have enough time. And then the whole battle happened with Wamu. Wamu lost, and then Cars, and then during that whole thing, Stroheim and the Germans want to tell JoJo that they want to tell JoJo that Lisa was his mother, and see how things take an interesting turn. But they haven't had a chance to tell him up to that point, because the battle was still going on. And so the whole battle with Cars, they're all fighting Cars, and then what is it? Cars gets the red stone, and then boom, That's when he goes nuts. And, what is it? The redstone is supposed to have all this power. Basically, Cars now has control of the world. Um, basically, Haman doesn't even really affect him anymore, and he's basically God. So, so what happens is JoJo starts flying a plane, and Cars is trying to fly with them. All the the Germans and Lisa are still on the ground, so they're keeping contact with him in the radio, and that's pretty fun. And yeah, eventually he crashes it, and um, and then boom, um, and then what happens is Cars um was it they have another fight, but that's when Cars explains to them all that Hamon doesn't affect him. He has 100 times Hamon now than JoJo, and blah blah blah. So basically, what they do to kill him is they throw him in a pit of lava, and yeah, and takes it a while, but eventually it happens, and boom, and yeah. So Cars went nuts because he basically attained the power of the world in his hands. So yeah, but that's basically part two. Um, definitely kind of a good part. Um, I've already watched the first episode of part three, so I already kind of know how stands work, and yeah. Um, part two. So overall, I would say that this is good. Good, good, good. Definitely not awesome, but pretty good. Um, just because, like, the fight's pretty dope. I've come to really like Joseph Joestar. Even though I didn't really like him in the beginning of part two, I think I just had to get used to his character style. I think that's what it was. But once I knew, like, he was, once I knew he pulled that thing off with Wamu, and then what he could do afterwards, it was like, boom, I like him way more now than I ever did Jonathan. So next, in part three, we get to meet JoJo. And, yeah, so, we have Jonathan, Joseph, JoJo, Josuke, and then some other JoJo's that we'll get to meet. And the iconic line that we all laugh about from the first episode of part 3 is, "Shut up! Get out of my face, you bitch!" Definitely iconic. Yeah, so, yep, so, part 2 is definitely good, and again, you probably won't be seeing another video from me for part 3 for a while now, just because, there's like 48 episodes, and there are so many stand fights, That, yeah, it's a lot, and it's gonna be a lot to talk about too. Kind of like it was for part 2. Again, like, I didn't really talk about much for part 1 just because, like, part 1 didn't really bring us much. And also only had like 9 episodes. You get to spend more time with Joseph because it's like 17 episodes. There's a lot more that happens that's interesting. And there's probably going to be a lot more for part 3. I feel like, again, like I say, I feel like as these parts go on, the videos are just going to get longer and longer. That's what's going to happen. Because I'm just going to sit here and yap. So, yeah. Yeah. Uh, do I have anything else to say? I don't really think so. So, yeah, that was part 2 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure reviewed. Battle Tendencies, that's the name of this part. Technically it's still called Phantom Blood, but that's just because what they did is when they made the anime, they put part 1 and part 2 together, but they didn't do it with any of the other parts. So, yeah. It's weird how they did all that, but yeah. And then part 3, that's 2 seasons. You have season 1, that's like 24 episodes, and then season 2, there's another 24 episodes, and that's why it's so long. And, yeah, so that's the second episode of JoJo Yup. So, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. And, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.